My name is Alana, and I use they, them pronouns.
And my name is Jessie. I use she, her pronouns.
And we're making menches.
Making Menches is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
Today we have an extra special episode for you all where we're talking all about the Dwell in Revolution project. We're going to talk to the two organizers of the project, Micah and Ollie. Micah and Ollie, along with organizing this entire project, also contributed writing and art. So hi, Micah and Ollie. We're so excited that you're here with us. Could you just both take a moment and introduce yourselves? So like, what is your primary work? Who are you? How might people know you?
Hey, I'm Micah Bazant. I'm a visual artist and activist, and I live in the Bay Area.
My name is Ollie Schwartz, and I think I'm here mostly in my capacity as the founder of Pushcart Judaica, which is an online store that's distributing ethically sourced and politically aligned lefty Judaica for the movement.
Thank you both so much. So excited for this conversation. How did this project come to be? Can you tell us a little bit about its origin story?
So for me, the seed of inspiration for this project actually came more than a year before Ollie and I started through my work with JVP, New York City, and Shotzi Weisberger, who many of you know, also known as the People's Bubby. She was an amazing queer, anti-Zionist Jewish activist. And in 2021, we made her portrait together. And, you know, she was so inspiring for so many of us who've been cast out of our families and communities of origin because of being anti-Zionist and being queer. And before she died, she said, "I'll fight like hell for a free Palestine until the day I die. Then I'll keep fighting. Your queer ancestor is with you." And those words just stayed with me, and we made yahrzeit candle wrappers for Shotzi with those words on them. And then after Israel's war on Gaza began, you know, and so many of us just threw ourselves relentlessly into Palestine solidarity organizing and, you know, strategically organizing against the Zionist weaponization of Jewishness and erasure of anti-Zionism, just rose to the surface that we needed our ancestors. We needed to find more ancestors to be with us, just as Shotzi is with us, to give us possibility models for our spiritual, political, and historical resistance and past and future. Molly Crabapple just published this beautiful essay about the Jewish Labor Bund, and this is a quote from the end. "Before fascism erases the other, it must purify the self. It must cut off the dissident, cosmopolitan, and solidaristic parts of its own people's history to foreclose other futures that may be. But the rebel dead are not so easy to silence, not in the forests of Eastern Europe and not in mutilated Gaza. Their words bleed into the present where they can be used by the living to create another world." So we need to create this other world. And this project was rising to the surface. And every time I would talk to people about it, there would be so much energy and we would get the shivers. And that's what often happens when there's a really strong idea. And then Ollie and I connected about the project, which was so amazing because they have such incredible writing and ritual and logistic skills and so many relationships to invite people into the project. So to you, friend.
Wow, thanks. I'm glad you brought that quote in. Well, one way that I came to this project is that I wanted people to have access and more meaningful connection with the Ushpizine practice, the ancestral connection practice for Sukkot. We wrote about this. We asked ancestors to dwell with us in the impermanence of climate chaos, mass extinction, viral epidemics, and the fall of capitalism through the sacred technology of encampment in the sukkah. May we remember, with the help of those who came before us, that we are not the first, nor will we be the last Jews to fight in solidarity for a free world and for a free Palestine. We lift up these 14 ancestors not as idols or upon pedestals, but rather as a prayer for continuity, for feeling their hands at our backs. And for me, the Ushpizine practice is one that is about radical hospitality. Something else I like about it is that it's really simple and powerful. I think like one of the things we're talking about to prepare for this podcast and in making this project, like all of us together on this call, is that ancestral connection isn't a given for everybody, and it's something that colonization has taken from us, that for white Jews and for many people is like assimilation for survival and for other reasons has taken from us. And so I'm really compelled by this practice because there are some pretty clear steps that we have held on to welcome ancestors. I think is a really beautiful gift that we get for a practice that doesn't feel intuitive for many of us. I also like that as queer and trans people, like making Menches and Micah and me, we are already in a commitment that defies blood lineage, that is interested in queer lineages and claiming people and having the power to call upon them as like family and resource. So those are just a few reasons that I'm obsessed with Ushpizine, and I wanted that practice to like be accessible, but I also wanted it to be like relevant and resourcing. One of the best ways that I know to do cultural work is to say like, I know I and people I love need this, so there's a good chance other people need it. And I would say in this case, that's all I knew. And having a political commitment to visibilizing that we are not the first, so we're not going to be the last, and culture shift. But like in terms of actually making an art project from that, that's all I knew. And then what is supportive to understanding if a cultural project is functioning and doing what it's meant to do is like, do people want it? And I think not to toot our horn, because anyone could have decided to commit capacity to this, but instead to say like, we need to recognize how important this specific type of ancestral and global international resource and support is for us. We put out this project and we were like, let's order 200. And then in 24 hours, we sold out of 200. And then in 4 days, we sold out of 400. And like 20,000 people wanted to see and engage with this as a digital thing on social media. And so like, again, that's not about us. It's about what's the content of the project, and that people like really need ancestral connection and examples.
Thank you both for sharing some more about like the background of how this project came to be. And it's really resonated with so many people because of the necessity to like carry on voices of people who maybe were part of the struggle and allow them to remain part of the struggle, and also to like re-examine ancestral connectivity practices that maybe we don't know as much about or like are forgotten because of assimilation. So like, what made you come together to create this? How did you first connect over this project?
Our relationship exists on many levels that feels powerful and beautiful to me in a work context, but also in an organizing and like comrade context. I felt like you, Micah, could be both like a peer and a mentor, and like trans kin and disabled kin and cultural worker kin, and that we could exist to provide from afar possibility models and political strategy. And like, I feel like I learned a lot from you.
I went through a period like during and right after the lockdown where a lot of my Jewish friends where I live had moved away, and I just felt very disconnected after years of being alienated from every Jewish institution. And I had really tried when I was younger to connect with Jewish spiritual practices, and it just was so blocked at every point because of trans stuff and Zionist stuff. And I was like, I'm going to look around and see what are people making that's new, and what are people who are younger than me doing. And I remember I found Pushcart Judaica on Making Menches, and I was like, damn, these people are doing amazing work. This is so cool. I'm going to follow them. And it's just, I think it's such a good model for all of us of like how we can build these relationships and like cultural organizing collaborations. You know, it's all possible through relationships. And this was a completely relational project. And we were connecting across generations to the ancestors and within this project. Like, I'm 51, and when I was in my 20s and 30s, like, I was trying to find a place for myself within Judaism as a trans anti-racist person and couldn't find that place. And it's such a pleasure to get older and such an example of what kind of cultural change is possible. You know, like when I was in my 20s, I wrote this little zine about trans Jewish existence, trying to find my trans Jewish ancestors because there was nothing, you know, and now we have these whole worlds of trans and queer Jewish life. And like, that's where I really think we're heading, and what this Dwell project is a part of, is building a whole Jewish culture that lives separately from and in opposition to Zionist Judaism. And it starts with events and minions and zines like this. And then decades from now, we're going to have rabbinic programs and synagogues and theaters and summer camps, because we've seen it. It's happened before. It will happen again.
I mean, whew, need to hear that
Amen.
right now. But yeah, this connection across like generation and also across like geographical distance, even though it's just in the US, like we live on opposite sides of the country, and like those connections are so important, and it's been really cool to make them and then like get to this point in our relationship where we're like, I hopped on school and I was like, oh, we're talking to these people that I love. Like, that's awesome. All that to say, sometimes collaborating can like be messy and uncomfortable and wonderful, even with people that like we adore a lot. So I'm curious, what was it like for the two of you collaborating to create this project? Like, what came up during that process?
Working in the Jewish world, working in the cultural sphere, like, I think necessitates relationships that have multiple levels. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I also think, it can be hard. And like something that I think happened with both of our collaborations independently, like on the Dwell project and on the Haggadah that Making Mentions we made together, was that like, I feel like we came to saying I love you by like working really hard, working really late into the night, asking hard questions, people asking us questions we didn't know we were going to get, being way deep in over our heads because like we knew we wanted something, but like, boy, did we not know how badly 500 to 1,000 to 2,000 other people wanted it. And to me, there's so many ways that I want to be in deep, authentic, whatever, however words you want to use, relationship, real relationship, where we like help each other survive. And one way that is so sweet for me is like when we come to the like, I love you, by going through being a channel for our movements together and being like, wow, this is so much bigger than us. And I'm so glad we have each other, because like I couldn't do this by myself. And I'm so glad I'm doing this with you. We brought to the table ourselves and our ideas and our relationships with anti-Zionism and our different artistic skills, but we also brought different movement connections that were like vast and wide. And I think that's why this project was possible. One reason that I thought this project was powerful was that it like truly needed all those different parts of cultural work to function. Like, we couldn't have done it without being able to ask historians, and we also couldn't have done it without people in the streets and everyone in between.
It really was just really a pleasure, Machaya, to collaborate with Holly and you too. I mean, most of my cultural organizing projects have been collaborative. I don't take any of this for granted, you know, and so many incredible artists like Iola, who like, when we found out there was an error with the portrait source photo, like just hustled at the last minute to make it happen with no extra compensation. I mean, people just truly doing this out of the love of their hearts when we're all desperately busy. It's part of our cultures and something we're struggling with, of how do we create continuity, like both spiritually and like day to day? How do we not kill ourselves making these projects? I mean, I was disabled before this project was finished, and now I'm not saying it's my fault or it's the project's fault, but sadly, like, I'm severely disabled now. And these practices like don't help when there's a cost to this kind of working. And I hope that other people will not work this way. If I could go back and talk to my past self, I would say, don't do it that way. But like, am I glad that this project exists? Absolutely. We never know what something will cost. but I am very proud of it and grateful for it.
I think for me, the gift of not being able to be as deeply of a rapid response body to inhabit is that I'm like, okay, I can see a little better what's missing because I'm moving a little bit slower, and I can see that we really need this. So I think that they're both were true in this project and both lenses apply. I like to lift up like the gift of disabled people to like see with a different lens on time, and sometimes that helps us to fill gaps that respect the hustle is in a different time frame of existence. That is hard and important too.
So there's a ton of labor, and then there's also this responsibility of like, why would you choose to do that? Why didn't you do this differently? Everybody has a perspective and opinion, and it's always valid. There's no right one way to do anything. And I'm curious what the research process was like and how you decided to choose the ancestors that you chose.
At one point, we realized, like there are many people who are revolutionaries and they're amazing, but we don't have any record of them taking any kind of public anti-Zionist action, and that was our bar. And we interpreted that really broadly. We reached out to folks that we knew in Mizrahi, Sephardi, and BIPOC Jewish communities. We were advised by Shirley Bahar and Julia Peck, who's a Ladino scholar, and Dr. Devin Nahr, who's a professor of Sephardic studies, helped us research and find many more ancestors. But still, I wish that we'd found more Jewish people of color, more women, more queer and trans and disabled people. And that we were doing the research mostly on the internet in English, so it's just limiting.
That's really important to speak to the limitations of what we could portray and access. And I also think within those constraints, something that was really powerful to me when I flip through the zine or look at the portraits is how much more of an international lens I can access or need to access as a US person. Like a brief look through the zine, Aola's was talking about the exile of Abraham Sarfati, and then Hadar spoke about how Salim Halali was also threatened in exile and other more escalatory ways. And the ancestor I worked with, Maurice Nessim, was exiled. And most of these people before exile had already immigrated. And we're talking about people from Algeria, Morocco, the Ottoman Empire, Iraq, Istanbul. These are people who have an international sensibility to their politic that to me was like extremely inspiring and does not feel like the Jewish world that I live in right now. I think that Jewish world exists, but I don't feel like it's the normative Jewish world in the US that I'm shown, even as a leftist, interested in and committed to international solidarity. I also thought something powerful about like who ended up in this collection of this iteration of this project were like people who were traitors to Zionism, as in they were rather raised in Zionist families, like Arna Mer Kamis, who's born in a settlement and married a Palestinian, and then dedicated her life to working with young people under occupation. Naim Giladi, who served in the IDF and then created the Israeli Black Panthers. So representing many different lenses on this experience, Emma Goldman, and other people who didn't live to the creation of the Zionist state, but were in beginning conversations about what it would look like to form a political critique of Zionism in the first place, which is a really different historical moment. I think the breadth of the project, the non-linearity of who is there, is a really good starting place that feels deeply resourcing, even if it's not enough. It's not the whole thing.
How many artists contributed to this project in total?
28.
I just want to pause and take a moment. There is so much invisible labor that goes into projects like this, and just want to visibilize that for a second. And on top of the invisible labor, you both also have visible labor that was part of this project, because you both have artistic pieces in the project as well. Ollie, you wrote a piece for the project, and Micah, you drew a piece for the project. And so I would love to know what were both of your creative processes like for those pieces?
Also, for more information about the ancestor Micah is going to be speaking about, Salim, stay tuned for part 2 with Hadar Cohen.
I mean, Salim is just such a wonderful, queer, juicy, opulent figure and was one of the first ancestors that I found out about in my research. So I did selfishly grab him for myself. I talk about myself as a movement artist. Like my art comes out of my work in social justice movements. So much of it has been rapid response over the years. And so much of the impact of work is about like the story of the work, how it came to be, who it's depicting and when, and like not because it's the best drawing. And do I wish it was the best drawing? Yes. But I think that the value of what I do is unfortunately not always about, oh, I am in love with how I drew this, but it's, you know what? I am cultivating imperfection. I'm not letting perfection be the enemy of completing this. And okay, we got to do it. And I'm going to try and do a respectful, honoring portrait of Salim. And I'm not going to get into all my model minority. It's got to be an A+ Jewish bullshit. And just, have that be good enough. And I feel proud of that, to be honest, as well, because that's such an important practice that I had to learn over many years of being an artist.
I also just need to say, like, it's wild to hear you say that because I am obsessed with your piece. Like, I'm like, wait, what? Like, I love this piece. I mean, all of them are incredible, so I'm not going to say I have favorites. And like, I really, really like this one. So yeah, I think that just speaks to the fact that like we are all our own worst critic in such intense ways. So thank you for uplifting that, because I think it's important for people to hear that these pieces that they also think are incredible, the creators have feelings about.
Right. And to remember, as creators and artists, most of us feel that way. We can't see how our work will be received when we're creating it.
I wrote a piece that I feel similarly so incredibly complicated about and centered on honoring ancestor Maurice Nessim, who was an early 20th century Sephardic Jew from what was then known as Salonika, Greece, which was considered the Ottoman Empire. And his primary work in the United States was preserving Sephardi and Ladino culture through socialist organizing, and specifically through the medium of newsprint, which is hard for me to understand, or like I need to do the work to make that culturally relevant to me. But when I think about what newsprint was in a time before the internet and a time before access to news, like I feel a deep resonance with the work that he was doing as someone who was like, we need people to have access to a physical thing that will help them feel connected to their people. And that is a deeply political distribution project, actually, which I feel a kinship with in my work, like shipping Judaica every day across the world. And he was like a prolific person despite a lot of forces conspiring against him. He published like over 200 issues of his newspaper in the US, despite like anti-Semitism from the US government, being in exile from his homeland due to anti-Semitism and Ashkenazi racism on the Lower East Side, which is where I'm from. So there are a lot of connections for me in this piece. Something else just that feels like a specific example of the power of this project in its cross-movement connections that Micah shared, that we worked with Dr. Devin Nar, who is a professor of Sephardic Studies and Jewish History at University of Washington. But at the time that we were like in a time crunch emailing with him and working on this project, he was actually in the homeland of Maurice doing more research about the amazing, rich, radical socialist print culture and Jewish world that existed there, that in the US feels very erased for me and my upbringing. I never learned about anything happening there, but was a very, very significant hub of Jewish culture. I sent my piece to Devin and he gave edits, and that was like an extremely important and humbling experience for me. And we also had no pictures of Maurice because he occupied a really different, more background distribution role in the movement, and so there were less depictions of him, and Devin was in touch with his family and was able to provide some images. And also a barrier for me that again feels complicated is that there are really amazing preserved copies of La Base de Puebla, which is one of the names of the newspaper that you can access digitally through the National Library of Israel, which is complicated, but is also sponsored by Columbia, NYU, and the New York Public Library. So that's interesting. But basically every copy of the newspaper is accessible, but they're all in Hebrew print in Ladino. So I was like working with a lot of direct archival information that I couldn't interpret in the way that it deserves to be interpreted. It was also meaningful and special to work with creative constraints and feel a deep kinship with someone else doing similar but very different work to me in the neighborhood that I grew up in 100 years before. So yeah, there's a lot there.
I'm curious what dreams you have for Dwell's reach and impact in the future.
You know, my number one dream with any project is just that it has a life in the world, you know, and we know it has, we know it got out to like Gaza Solidarity Sukkahs. Like I went to services and there it was just hanging up in the tent. I know it will keep circulating. I think we had so many dreams that are way beyond our capacity, beyond my capacity. You know, for example, we had this dream of doing a public database gathering of ancestors, because there are so many people who maybe are like, my grandmother was an amazing anti-Zionist ancestor, nobody's heard about her, where people could just upload their stories and share them with each other. I think if I was doing this again, it would be amazing to have more access to different kinds of archives and scholars and places that you can't find on the internet, and community archivists. And, you know, I hope that people will just feel free to use it to do any kind of offshoot project. Like if you want to use any of the art or writing in the zine, just reach out to that artist or writer, you know, and like keep remixing it with their permission, and do your own project inspired by this project.
I think a dream that I don't have any current plans for, but that I have, is that like Sukkot is a holiday that we have every year, and that we get to hang more and more. We get to put up more and more portraits of like beautiful portraits of anti-Zionist ancestors, and that in some form we get to do versions of Discovery each year that are given equal connection to current cultural workers to make them feel relevant and beautiful and impactful.
I also just want to say, you know, my ultimate foundational dream for the impact of this project is that people will think about what kind of ancestor they want to be.
Thank you both for making this project happen, which was such a feat, and for your contributions to the project, which were beautiful. Where can people find out more about both of your individual work, and where can people buy Dwell if they want to check it out?
You can find Judaica and more at pushcartjudaica.com, which is also where you can currently digitally download the Dwell in Revolution zine.
Thanks for listening to Making Menches. As an explicitly anti-Zionist grassroots org, we don't receive any institutional funding or support. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmenches.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Making Menches. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Menches, the podcast, is produced by Alana Lipkin and Jesse Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander. Editing by Jesse Sander.